Okay, this one's on We Was Amazonian Women.
Female African warriors have an extensive history within the African continent. African women fighting in battle is a well documented reality, so much so that the Greeks even romanticize and champion their existence. It brings a whole new element to the strong black woman. Your strength.
Well, the only problem with that is that that woman that he showed on the wall isn't a Negroid at all. The second one did was some artistic representation, but the first one wasn't. That's a Kandake is a Persian queen's name, and it passes queen to queen. It's just kind of like calling her queen, and it's a Persian thing. It goes with it. Moreau right there is named by Cambyses of Persia for his sister. And we talked about Ethiopia, but believe it or not, he's even going to show that, which debunks everything he says about Ethiopians and all the other ones, and the one you just saw the other day, um, by showing that map. But then he just, I guess he expects when he shows the map, he just wants people to gloss over it. Let's continue.
Has been noted throughout antiquity.
Who? Hey. And so he shows a depiction, which seems to be an African woman with a bow and arrow, but this recurved bow style that she's holding on to right there is actually a style that comes in from the Hyksos and stuff, and that's been well documented, along with horses, the chariot, things along that nature. So there's also Diana the Huntress. Yeah, and that's the goddess of love that becomes the goddess of war and stuff. It works with Anana and all the Caucasian type religions too. But this is just a black woman with a bow, I guess. Let's see what he's got to say about it.
What up, African world? It's your boy Home Team here. I'm back at it with another video of African history, culture, and worldview.
Wow.
And today I want to talk about African Amazons and Greek mythology. I know, it's been a while. When we think of Amazons, we're largely bombarded with images of beautiful Eastern European women fighting and dying in battle.
Yeah, the Amazonian thing that we have in our mind is these women that are scantily clad, but what is clad on them is armor and stuff. And you could look at something from Conan the Barbarian's Valeria that's just, is his muse, if you will, and or partner, and his that depiction going through time of a woman that might be a warrior. See, the common motif is a woman in distress and a knight in shining armor. And if you can't get that, it goes all the way back before there was knights and before there was a tower. It actually goes back way before that idea. But it doesn't, when he says African, he's trying to insinuate Negroid as opposed to Caucasians and stuff like that. But we'll get into that in just a moment.
And Cecilia, all the way to Xena. But you guessed it, the very first Amazons, according to Greek mythology, actually came from Africa. But I mean, can we actually be surprised that these Greeks actually placed the very first Amazons in Africa? I mean, these guys literally popularized the Nubian queens of Kush because they frequently mentioned how they were warrior queens.
And Kushites aren't Negroids. I know a lot of people are going to fight me on that, but you can look at their coins and their image of the non-prognostic jaw and so on, and this is a queen's image. And I know she's got a big butt because she's healthy. But there's a lot of depictions that work along that line in Venus and so, and it does not have to do with that idea. In fact, there's this idea of the land of Punt, where if you look, the women are kind of big butt. Like, pardon me, Grandma, but like my grandma had a staunch hip. My mom was fairly skinny and everything all of her life, but Grandma had that going on. Don't see it in the rest of my family, my sister or anything yet. I don't know what brings that out or does things to it, but she had hip problems from breaking her hip from falling on ice whenever she was in her 20s, late 20s, early 30s. and later in life it started to affect her and stuff, and she got to be one of those persons that would have used a hip replacement, but she died before they really had that technology in use. But that has nothing to do with this. I'm sorry. And this, you can see an Egyptian stylized ideology where these different people, and they've got their hands up like no, and they're surrendering to her. She's standing on a lion. We talked about this the other day. Here's that raven symbology, but it's also the bird, for if you flipped his wing back out the other way and he's holding the circle. This is the same situation going on with Mesopotamia and Mithra and all that through there, and has the same symbology. And that doesn't hook up to black people in any way, but they really try hard. But not only that, but even whenever I showed that the Green Sahara had all this cave art in it, and there was mermaids and stuff, and mermaids of the Green Sahara, they get on and jumped on, and they were like, we were mermaids, and it's like, no, oh man, so here's the genetics of the people that are from there, and then you don't get any response much on that one. Sometimes you do. Sometimes you get where they get a total different response, where they start claiming other things than, like they were part of the Bible or something, or other civilizations. Anything really but West African primitives. Let's go on.
In fact, they did it so much, early historians even thought they were exaggerating. More specifically, the Greek historian Diodorus Siculus mentioned that the very first Amazons came from Africa.
Yeah, and they thought they were exaggerating because the stories were these women, they would fight. And if you ever did fight these people and beat them and then went back to take their women were going to fight. In fact, the women were fighting with the men and doing cavalry charges and all kinds of things like this. But this is up in Scythian lands that we've talked about, and recently I showed a story that connects with all the Amazons, and it was a thing too about tattoos and how they get tattoos, and that women don't usually get tattoos, but that's in the culture that's talking about them. See, modern day we have all these names of Greek things, and we've got all this Greek and Roman theology, but a lot of people had slightly different variations on a theme. And certain people grew out of beards and didn't want to learn Greek, and he called them barbarians because they acted like they didn't want to learn their language because they thought they were hoity-toity. You could probably say that about English now, but if we all just cut the crap, then we realize that, yeah, it's an easier to speak language, and most every other language can easily discern it and start to speak it enough, and we can make it a common language of Earth, and it's really become so. It's kind of an unbabylizing of Earth, but let's just get into this, where he tries to claim that North Africans apparently were Negroids, which was never in effect until much, much later, and that we was Amazons.
He said, and I quote, "But now that we have examined these matters, it will be fitting, in connection with the regions we have mentioned, to discuss the account which history records of the Amazons who were in Libya in ancient times."
Now, I hate to have to cut in right there, but black people also never want to put anything in context. Like whenever he made the mistake about the jug and showing, and he said these were all black Ethiopians, and then you look at all these jugs and they're all white women and stuff, and then he still tried to claim that they were sub-Saharan Negroids, not even an Ethiopian, but a sub-Saharan Negroid, which, it just shows you a total disconnect and a wanting to connect to something that doesn't have anything to do with them. And so Libya in ancient times was the name of the whole continent of Africa, and really if you look at the maps they drew and what information they gleaned out of it to formulate their maps, they didn't even know sub-Saharan Africa existed. The desert went off into crap, and that was pretty much the abyss and so on, and the sun went right there, which is the equator, and they kind of didn't know about the other part of it. In fact, whenever Necho had made their trip and went around and said the sun was on the other side of the ship, when they turned the other way and went around the cape, he thought that was BS, or they claimed they did, because he would have passed the equator by then. But that's a whole different story. Let's get into this where he tries to claim it. See, Africa was called Libya before it was named Africa. It was named Libya by Caucasians and then named Africa by Caucasians, and it has to do with them. But let's continue.
For the majority of mankind believe that the only Amazons were those who are reported to have dwelt in the neighborhood of the Thermundan River on the Pontus. But the truth is otherwise, since the Amazons of Libya were much earlier in point of time and accomplished notable deeds. Now we are not unaware that too many who read this account the history of this people will appear to be a thing unheard of and entirely strange. For since the race of these Amazons disappeared entirely many generations before the Trojan War.
And this is relating to stories about Atlantis, and it'll kind of get into it. But this is relating to stories of people and the ancient Berbers that were living there and a catastrophe that happened to them, and the Eye of the Sahara and Atlas Mountains, and how it has to do with Atlas holds up the world. And I've told you a million times, but I have to say it in each one of these videos in case people are watching that have not heard it, that Greek gods were from gods all over the world, like Dionysus and so on, and Atlas, which apparently is in North Africa, and it can show you the realm that people knew of at that time, but also it really kind of shows you the realm that they didn't know about. What they didn't know about was Scandinavia and lands on past there and through the Celts, and any part of that really in Europe and stuff as we know it, the UK. And they also didn't know about the end of China, it appears, but anything other than that they had almost right, except the tip of India. But they don't show that sub-Saharan Africa exists, and he's going to show that in a minute. But this had happened long before the Trojan War, so this is another ideal from before where these women were tattooed. And if you look at the ancient Egyptians where they show Libyans coming in and nobles, they're lighter skinned because they're nobles. They're not having to work outside, and they have these curls and locks of hair and everything, kind of like Nazarites and kind of like Samson and all these things that really go together if you watched a lot of my videos. And they have tattoos on their arms and legs. I've showed this in a few other videos and don't want to keep cutting into little things like that, because if I do, this will get into a multi-parter.
So basically, Diodorus is saying, yeah, I know you guys know of the Amazons in Europe, but the first Amazons actually came from Africa. Diodorus even gets more specific and gives us more details. He says, and I quote, "We are told, namely, that there was once on the western parts of Libya, on the bounds of the inhabited world, a race which was ruled by women, and followed a manner of life unlike which prevails among us."
Now, he would like the bald-faced stare into the camera and get you to believe that they didn't even mention that they were Negroids or anything different about them whatsoever. And he'd like to get you to believe that West African primitives weren't West African primitives whenever we found them, even at the late slavery that came to America. But even 900 years before that, whenever the starting of the Islamic slave trade, but even about 800 years before that, whenever contact had to be made with a few separate groups and so on, and going through the desert, which was an almost impossible adventure until they brought camels into, and that came much, much later, which I showed in a recent video, and where they actually come from, and North American stuff, and why they are like they are, totally different than what other people think, and that humped idea that goes with bison and everything that seem to be more of a mammoth and cold version, and their feet isn't made for walking through sand but snow originally, and it adapted quite well. In fact, they adapt quite well. So do Caucasians. But he wants you to believe that this has something to do with black people, and we'll get into it.
Diodorus goes on to tell us where exactly in western Libya these first Amazons came from. He says, and I quote, "As mythology relates, their home was on an island which, because it was in the west, was called Hespera, and it lay in the marsh Tritonus. This marsh was near the ocean which surrounds the earth and received its name from a certain river Triton, which emptied into it."
Now, I'm going to pause that, but I'm in the middle of the marsh discussion. And people have said the Eye of the Sahara, and really, if the ground wasn't pushed up in that area, that it could have a river running right through there around it, and it would actually start to look like the rings of some Atlantean thing, and it would spill back out, and you can see this enveloped spill that goes out of it. I made a video about Atlantis and stuff, and Bright, Insight, and a bunch of others have, and it's kind of neat to see that and some idea of where the mythical Atlantis may be, because of course if they have Atlas Mountains and they describe it, and in some of his maps it even says Atlantes with ES instead of IS, but right there, and of course this ocean it's named after them. Now, that islands they're talking about would have been those Canary Islands and the Guanche people and stuff, which seem to be tall, blondish haired people, and they've built some pyramids on there too and stuff. But no, is it the island part that's trapped in the center of that little river that all comes through there, and they live in there, and it looks like a circle, which is looks like a natural feature, but at the same time is it would look quite unnatural if it was all filled into water just to the right point. And they used to get a lot of rain through there. For just some 5000 BC, the area was much more lush, and going back before that, there were large amounts of rain. Is this remembering back a time even that far away, for they don't mention it? No, oh, they also mention Triton, which is not only a horn that they blow, woo, but the Titans and Tritons, and then there's a lot that goes with that. But so this marsh and this shore here, and he's going to bring up Ethiopians, and so you're supposed to think that Ethiopians in this little country that used to be called Abyssinia, all of a sudden they're everywhere.
And this marsh was also near Ethiopia, and that mountain by the shore of the ocean, which is the highest of those in the vicinity, and impinges upon the ocean, and is called by the Greeks Atlas. So where
exactly are Ethiopians? Well, they're all over the place, and they're Caucasians, and basically they're hooked up to farming communities, and you'd call them rednecks today. And if we were to wonder about the Ethiopian area in America, there'd be a lot of brown blotches and a lot through the heartland of America, and what's all keeping us alive and feeding us that nobody talks about. And I remember when I was a kid, they had Farm Aid and everything because crap was happening to the farmers. They were just basically screwing them over, and all for a price thing and all groceries, and oh man. But you'd see blotches everywhere, and in South Texas and stuff for its parts too. And even though Mexicans come across the border, and well, that may not be doing the same as it used to recently soon, but come across the border and do seasonal work there, you can still get passes. You just got to do it legally. That they would do that and everything, and because you saw those people doing that, and that's one of them. Are you saying all of them are, or what? He's fixing to reveal that in a minute. But also, this destroys the whole idea, and I use this exact word for word statement in my video where I debunk Ethiopians, and I show you where it is and everything else. I Diodorus Siculus and a few others, and what they say, and Herodotus, and how that's been taken out of context.
Exactly can we place these Amazons according to Diodorus? Well, first and foremost, according to the Greeks, all lands west of Egypt was called Libya.
Yep.
Diodorus was basically telling us that these African Amazons were in and around Lake Tritonis, and also near Ethiopia, near the Atlas Mountains as well.
So now we're going to actually, somehow he's going to actually show this whenever he's trying to talk about Negroids, and he's trying to tell West African people, and West African people start from below that pink, and it might be one reason he's trying to direct people to think, hey, you were here, right, off the map, and they don't even know you exist, but maybe you've got something to do with this up here, even though they're not talking about black people, or they'd say it. And when they show them on the vases, there's these pale women and stuff, and the other ones that are like it that they talk about, which means warrior women and stuff, ends up being way up in Scythia. He tries to make a connection. If you look at all the brown splotches, and I'm sorry, it goes right off the edge of the screen here, but it all goes to the end of river valleys, and it's really all farmers. In fact, the telltale thing, the Caucasus Mountains, where everybody wants to say Caucasians were only from there and everybody else was someplace, sillily, have that same blotch. Why? Because there's farming up in there. The Colchians and all the stuff. And Egypt is surrounded by them. And Meroe is named after Cambyses' sister, and so on. But he's going to try to say for black people, whenever there's Phoenicians all over the place, and how they had taken over in ancient times, and then, but called Canaanites, right? And we know that. And then there later became these people that were at the ports, and they were great merchants, and they were known as Phoenicians. Well, in reality, that's the same thing. The Phoenicians called themselves Canaan. Okay, so let's continue. What's he going to say?
So according to Holmesian logic, that would place them right about here.
And not there, but that put them right about Atlas Mountains and stuff, and so it'd be right about here at the S, maybe, if you remember the recot structure that's there in the eye of the Sahara.
What's even more interesting to me is how Diodorus actually described the demographic of that area. He even goes as far to tell us that there were actually Ethiopians living in this region.
And he didn't say anything about Negroids. In fact, none of the talking about them really is. For if you just looked at that map, he's saying they're all over the place and up in Europe and freaking into the edge of Russia and Scythians and stuff. And this is not got anything to do with black people, and you damn well know it. And in fact, Negroids that we were talking and trying to say this, like him himself, didn't know any of this existed. And look, the Greeks didn't even know they existed. But
He says, and I quote, "The Amazons, then, the account continues, being a race superior in valor and eager for war, first of all subdued all the cities on the island, except the one called Mean."
and people have said that has to do with Menes and the origins of a component in Egypt, but much after Scorpion King and things. But what we talk about as being the invention of that. But also people said that no, that's Minoans, and that's the Minoan,
which was considered to be sacred and was inhabited by Ethiopian Ithophagia.
Ithophagi means fish eaters. Phagi, like in phagi, means to eat. So they have, right on the coast, they have lotophages. And so this is where the sarcophagi, sarcophagi, comes from. But ichthyes is fish. And I've got a bunch of things I could talk about fish. I was way into that too. Another one of my muses all the way through. And in fact, I'll get into it at a different time, but just want to explain what ichthyophagy was.
And was also subject to great eruptions of fire, and possessed a multitude of the precious stones which the Greeks called anthrax, sardion, and smaragdos.
And this actually points out that this is the island that blew up a long time ago in Santorini and stuff, and it may be, yeah, it has to do with the Minoans too. This is a connection they're making, but don't know why Negroids are trying to put this in there, for it just kind of says no. And look, Ethiopians are everywhere, and oh, that's not the people that are there today. No, that was called Abyssinia until recently. In fact, the definition of Caucasian race shows that they're all Caucasians. Even the phenotype's still there today, but that's not what they're talking about.
And after this, they subdued many of the neighboring Libyans and nomad tribes, and founded within the marsh Tritonis a great city, which they named Chirinosus.
Chirinosus. It's a CH on that version is Ka, and would have been drawn with an X.
So Diodorus very clearly states that these African Amazons conquered everyone in the region except these Ethiopians, because apparently they considered their land to be sacred. Diodorus seems...
I caught that just at the wrong time. There's something too that people say it had to do with Ceranos and stuff, and that actually that has something to do with far Celtic things, but that's a long drawn out and thing to even try to put together for y'all right now.
To allude to the fact that there was some sort of relationship between these Amazons and these Ethiopians. Any land that anyone considers sacred hints at some sort of cultural connection, perhaps even hinting at their origin.
So you say there is some Ethiopians near there, and that somehow means that these Amazons were Ethiopians, but that's Negroids. And no, man, that doesn't work mathematically, logically, or anything. But people like him and the people that watch his videos live off this stuff, believe it or not.
No doubt confirms that these Amazons were native African people.
Actually, it kind of infers that they had come either from a small portion of that area and started to take it back over, and perhaps when everything went to crap, the remnant of that, once it grew back up, had tried to take over everybody. And this sounds so much like the story of Atlantis too, where these people tried to come and take over everything, and then he tells, you know, Solon, he tells him that, but your people then showed brightest among people, and you shone forth with all your, and you saved all of us. You saved everybody within the Pillars of Hercules from these people that had done this. But he's trying to interject black people into something that they never were in. Let's keep going.
Like I mentioned all the time, Athos, or Ethiopian to the Greeks, simply meant of burnt face, and largely
Burnt face, sunburnt face, and it largely meant people that got tans, for they kept themselves pale. And you can see in the Egyptian and Greek, Minoan, Etruscan, and all the art around the place there that they have red ochre men or tanner men and pale women. And it's a Caucasian edict. And whenever you see that, they can't get the ideal of it. But even in his idea, where he's talking about where the Greeks show their art and they've only got 3 color forms, why they show some of them light and some of them dark and doing this, and he explains it to everybody while he's trying to show you that this white lady over here with long hair is a sub-Saharan Negroid. It's freaking hilarious. It's in one of my other videos. I'm going to put it at the top left at the end of this one, so people can go directly to it. I just did it the other day, but hey, it'll be a reprise, part of Comedy Hour if you want, for the logic here escapes them quite a bit. Let's continue.
refers to Nubian people. The most
Oh, now, man, I should have let that go right till then. He tries to say Ethiopians means Nubians, and no, that doesn't in any way, shape, or form. No one has ever made that connection in any way, shape, or form. But somehow he wants to make it seem like all black people are the same, and Nubians is West Africans. And it's like, no, they're not even related. Nilotics aren't related. Khoisan aren't related. What are you trying to do? Congo and Bantu expansion, and that's a totally different thing. But they don't like that history, and so they try to take things and twist it weirdly. Let's continue a little bit.
venerated of all the Amazons was Queen Myrina. She was beloved amongst the Amazons, and she found large amounts of success within her reign.
Oh man, I cut it and the picture went away. See a woman on a horse, and so this is after the Hyksos era, unless you want to say, oh, well, they just made something up. Who's making something up?
Her golden age was immortalized by Diodorus. He says, and I quote, "Now the queen of the Amazons, Myrina, collected, it is said, an army of 30,000 foot soldiers and 3,000 cavalry, since they favored to an unusual degree the use of cavalry in their wars. For protective devices, they used the skins of large snakes, since Libya contained such animals of incredible size."
And this is a made-up thing, but it has to do with the snake theology that's in that area, and the woman that's holding 2 snakes in her hand and stuff. It's really a master of beasts symbology, and see, a woman there shouldn't be the one that's holding the pillars up or the one that's doing the thing. Why does it have a woman in that position? Why is she tattooed whenever the men do? Whenever I was young, women really didn't get tattooed, and if they got tattooed, you knew they were a skank or something, right? And it's totally different now. Culture's totally different. Heavy metal and things like that brought it to us. But when I was a kid, we were kind of led to believe that overseas in some of the islands, they were doing tattoos, and servicemen saw it and caught a hankering for it. But you come to find out these Caucasians in ancient times were doing tattoos, and the reality of it all. Now, this giant snakes they have there, like, boa constrictors and these type of giant pythons and stuff like that. It's well known and stuff, but also that can lead to those ideas of Leviathan and all this. But how do they have cavalry, and what time is this when they're writing later? And oh, interesting enough, the name Myrina, does that sound familiar to you? For doesn't that have to do with aquatic, nautical type things like water and boats too? Doesn't it? Myrina. Wouldn't you think that boats pull up to a marina? The blacks, who really don't like to swim and aren't known for it, and being able to do it unless taught about it and everything, are claiming Myrina now. Okay.
And for offensive weapons, swords and lances. They also used bows and arrows, with which they struck not only when facing the enemy, but also in flight, by shooting backwards at their pursuers with good effect.
Now, this is actually the idea of the Scythian women and stuff, and how they would run into battle and have people come and chase them, and then they'd have a secondary group that would try to flank while they turned around and chased at each other. And there was this series of choreographed kind of moves and stuff. Not that choreographed, not like people slowly marching at each other till they see the whites of their eyes and then trying to shoot with a musket like some crap stupid, that, well, we abandoned that idiotic move because people shoot cannonballs through you and just blow the hell out of you. It's kind of idiotic. Of course, back then when people would group up, they would shoot volleys of arrows into them. But you can tell that this is not talking about really anything other than the Scythians, with the idea of the lances and so on, riding horses, cavalry, and being able to shoot from behind, because they are known from, kind of like that movie Brave, isn't it? Isn't that what it is? The red-headed girl that's, it's kind of a Scottish deal, and the Mardu and the big bear. It's a kid's cartoon and everything, how she can ride a horse and shoot and stuff. And this is a Scythian thing, of course, the horsemen, and where that comes from. And so you can't make that connective. And even Theodorus is speaking about Amazons here. He seems to be adding other things they know about Scythian Amazons to them in a time way before, and what we know for sure, there weren't any horses even in North Africa. So it would have been strange for them to have been there in the time. And he doesn't talk about them riding elephants or anything, and camels weren't there. Go ahead.
One of Queen Myrina's greatest moments was when she defeated and subdued the Atlanteans. They even paid homage to her. She even went as far as the Middle East. Diodorus says, and I quote, "As for Myrina, the account continues. She visited the larger part of Libya, and passing over into Egypt, she struck a treaty of friendship with Horus, the son of Isis, who was king of Egypt at that time."
Now, this would lend you to believe that it must have been after Egypt, which is named after the Greeks named it, that would have been after the point that they well know all their theology, and calling upon Horus and Isis actually being there and the king. Not that anyone else, but this was King Hor himself.
And then, after making war to the end upon the Arabians and slaying many of them, she subdued Syria. But when the Cilicians came out with presents to meet her and agreed to obey her commands, she left those free who yielded to her of their free will. And for this reason, they are called to this day the Free Cilicians.
People have actually made the connection that actually that was part of their tribe in the first place. Like the Phoenicians were around all over the place, and that, yeah, they just paid them homage and stuff. It was no big deal. If you fought them, they'd drive you into the ground. If you didn't fight them, they were okay about it. You'd see this re-echoed in the tales of Sesostris, where he comes in, and if the people wouldn't fight him, he would put up a pillar that had a female genitalia on it to say that they fought like women. But this is discounting the fact of these women that used to fight for this group in North Africa at one time that he makes a recollection to, but really the heart of what was going on in a time that they really have any histories of, and the only one is these other Caucasians that are up in Scythian lands, and I've got videos about it.
Interestingly enough, Diodorus even goes further into describing female warriors in Queen Myrina's army. These female warriors include Kaimi, Patana, and Preen.
And he shows 3 Negroids somehow in some battle gear and wants you to think that that's what they thought they looked like.
Apparently, there were such excellent warriors that even cities were named after them. The city of Mytilene was named after Queen Myrina's sister.
And then they want to put a Wakanda girl looking thing in here, and that's just hilarious. Please stop it, idiot. There's cities in Anatolia that they named for these people. Oh, man. We could just go to the definition. He could just go to the definition or wiki and find out more than he's trying to forgive. If this goes to part 2, it's going to be, God, it's going to be up in your upper left-hand corner, and in your upper right-hand corner will be that one that I was telling you about where he gets busted on the jug and tries to say a black woman's from sub-Saharan Africa, but
who took part in Queen Myrina's wars. Today, the names of these Amazons and these cities can be found off the coast of modern-day Turkey. Now, historically, Africans have been the originators of many things throughout history, but over time it's been either forgotten or just changed in totality to fit the needs and concerns of non-African people.
in other words, they done took everything from us and we was inventors and shit. And isn't that disgusting? He tries to put that out there. I'm just going to smile at you whenever I lie. I think I went back to the wrong point before that. But let's see.
And to mention that is very telling. The antiquity of the strong, courageous, mighty African woman is an ancient observed reality that has been duly noted. Now,
Duly noted, that face that he's trying to show a picture and try to say it's black people is a Caucasian. In fact, variations of that statue has Egyptian blue where the eyes are, and they couldn't even really see it. It's pretty much disintegrated away, but you can take an ultraviolet light up to it and they still show today. I did a video about it.
although strength is in your genetic reality, in modern times that great quality has been sometimes morphed into an imbalance due to New World pressures.
And people say that black people are freaking out and they've got an imbalance and they mental instability and they're not quite able to keep up with the world, and so they grip and try to claim ancient civilizations they didn't even know existed, nor did those civilizations really know they existed. But because they have a lack of anything they did in the area they came from, they try to compare themselves to something else, and it's an inferiority complex and an extreme problem, really. And I don't want to go this to 2 parts, so let's go.
Expectation for black women to be superwoman all the time, everywhere, and in all places isn't healthy and should be noted. The key
It should be noted that black women do get mad and wobble their head a whole lot, but they don't do much of supermaning. Although it's kind of looked like that, I guess, in the black community, because they're the only ones helping to raise the children. There's like 78% of black households are single parents and stuff. So, man, I bet he's got something else stupid to say, but let's go to the definition here. So, he would note it if it was in any way, shape, or form probably black-skinned or anything different than what was known in the known world. And I'm just going to zoom in on this, but even today, still people in India, now I know they're Denisovan cross, but what is that crossed with? And they even have some Neanderthal and everything like everybody else except for sub-Saharan Negroids had them, and it's really a type of Caucasian. They have Caucasian phenotype, not Mongoloid, Asiatic, Negroid. No, it's not. And the Horn of Africa to this day, with this Ethiopian Somalian look, is really a Caucasian phenotype, which you can tell it's still a Negroid. But in ancient times, there were some tan people there that were probably darker than this. For a lot of Caucasians, they want you to think that everybody is this color right here, and they catch fire in the sun and stuff. And while if you get that pale eventually somehow and spend hours out in the sun in a, you might get a sunburn. Big deal. That peeling that you do actually helps deradiate your skin, and it helps protect you and stuff too. But it's all an adaptation. It's incredible, adaptable, changing melanin. Yeah, it's wicked. But their Caucasian phenotype, you can just look at something like North Indian has a European influence with some Arabic twist into it. And you get North India. Whereas down at Sinhalese, you get more Malay influence into it and the darker skins. And this is just one of those commonality meters. But this is different phenotypes, and blacks have a prognostic jaw that sticks out, which Orientals and Caucasians don't have, but there are vast differences. And it's not the fact that they have an eye fold on their eye that Caucasians don't, for there's a lot of Scandinavians that doing stuff like Bjork, that singer, that weird singer from, where's she from, Finland or from Scandinavia or someplace, anyhow, Iceland, anyhow. And here's a funny, black people want you to get you to believe that an India person, but if they get an albino India person, it ends up being a Caucasian. And it's like, well, that's not at all how that works, and that's not what Caucasians are. But since Caucasian are heavily mixed into what the people are in India, of course it has that effect. But let's look at this. This is kind of telling. The green part is all the Caucasian race. And so you can see it's the Horn of Africa all the way through Egypt and all of that. Even they count the Sahara. Why do they count that? Because the bones they find there and everything and all the art all goes with this grouping of people. And so the yellow is only where the Negroids that are claiming all this really were, other than Nilotics, which they're not declimating, that are up in here, about where I'm pointing. And then the purple, I believe, they're trying to say are the Khoisan. Now, Asiatics are here, and because Asiatic Mongoloid, along with crosses, ends up being in America, that's blue too, over here. But Australoids are Denisovan. And where do you get that from? Well, some islands, but also it's mixed with the bottom of India. And some Denisovan's been found all the way up in caves and stuff up through here, which I've shown in some of my videos. But this doesn't have to do with it. So this is Caucasian race. And, early races. Here's the Jewish type, Semitic type from Algeria. Oh no, whoopsie. Mediterranean, Berber, Nordic. Yeah. Here's a better picture of the idea. This is kind of a neat depiction. It's where bright red was a long time ago. As the Sahara dried up, it turned to the medium red. Then at North Africa and Egypt, at the timing of 3500 BC and on, was Caucasians definitely all in that area. And then even from there past, in Egypt and all through this area, and concentrations are all up in Europe. And so whenever we talk about somebody who even he pointed out here, but I pointed out that the Eye of Sahara and Atlas Mountains are more here, that it's still there, and it doesn't have anything to do with Negroids, and I'm sure they would have pointed it out if it had anything to do with it. You can also look at this map, and it shows you Hamites is a division of the Caucasian race. And I guess one more proving, of it is just go to all Caucasian race. Let's go to Wikipedia. And if I was to here, now we know that Europeans are of course Caucasians, right? We know where Europe is, and right, and Western Asia. And where's that? Yeah, that's Yemen and everything. Those are types of Caucasians. And where's Central Asia? That's over up there in the Scythian lands almost, and they aren't going to talk about what's above that in really Russia necessarily, but they're Caucasians. South Asia too, which is India. Oh, yeah, what? Yep. And North Africa, busted. That contains Egypt and the area that we're talking about, for it's right about there where that little bend is. Right? And then even the Horn of Africa, just to make certain that you know what we're talking about. And that's even where the Ethiopians were of ancient times. And that's where Caucasians were of ancient times. And there's an admixed people there now we call Ethiopians because they live in a land that was called Abyssinia, and now it's called Ethiopia. Right? And that about does that. But let's see if we can end with him. Or I'm about to run out of tape.
There's balance. The strength of Afro-descended women is a highly valuable asset.
Really? Because you haven't talked tonight about it. But, well, I guess you talked about it, but you didn't say anything that was really true. Hey, there must be strong black women to at least make it through and raise up black people. But if you raise them up to be racist and liars or extremely effeminate or all the problems that are happening out of black people,